Who really runs the world? Ready to expose the invisible forces chaining tomorrow? Give this a like, share it wide, and subscribe or follow now. Truth like this only wins when the awakened stand together. Who really runs the world? Starting here with the foundations of how power and money intertwine in ways that shape everything from governments to everyday lives. Let's start with a glimpse without giving away the full picture. Picture a system where the rules seem fair on the surface, but dig a little deeper, and you find a setup designed to keep a select few at the top while the rest chase illusions of prosperity. It's built on centuries-old mechanisms that turn nations into pieces on a board, with debt as the ultimate lever. We'll explore how this isn't about shadowy figures in smoke-filled rooms but a fluid, ruthless dynamic driven by access to capital and betrayal at the highest levels. Diving right in, the core of this global power structure traces back to the creation of modern money systems, like the Bank of England in 1694. It began with a perpetual loan to the king, complete with endless interest and a monopoly on currency creation handed to private banks. Every unit of fiat money, pounds, dollars, you name it, is born as debt, but the interest to pay it back doesn't exist in the system. To keep things rolling, more debt must be created, turning the whole economy into a massive Ponzi scheme where new borrowers cover the shortfalls of the old ones. Consumers get treated like assets, loaded with high-interest loans for homes or credit cards, while big corporations snag near-zero rates close to central banks. Small businesses? They barely get a look in unless they've got steady cash flow, and even then, it's at premium rates. Governments act as the ultimate backstop, absorbing consumer and corporate bankruptcies onto public balance sheets. Politicians, funded by powerful lobbies, direct that spending to favor their sponsors, creating a facade of capitalism that's really favoritism for those with money-printing access. This leads to the K-shaped economy. The elite leverage cheap capital to hoard assets, while the masses sink deeper into debt servitude. Recent analyses, like those examining scandals such as Bernie Madoff's $65 billion fraud, highlight how these schemes thrive on information asymmetry, where insiders know the game's rigged but outsiders don't. Madoff's operation, one of history's largest Ponzi setups, promised steady returns by paying early investors with new funds, collapsing only when inflows dried up. It exposed regulatory failures, with agencies like the SEC ignoring warnings due to capture by the industry they oversee. Expanding globally, this model exported via institutions like the IMF and World Bank enforces privatization and Western central banks on debtor nations. Resist and face currency wars, intelligence ops, or engineered unrest turning riots into color revolutions. The British Empire pioneered this with mercantilism, funding colonialism through debt to extract resources from places like India and China, addicting populations to opium or committing famines to subordinate economies. Post-World War II, the US inherited this, amassing gold from colonialism and wars to dominate. The Bolshevist Revolution in Russia saw similar funding patterns, with families like the Warburgs on boards of both the Federal Reserve and German central banks, funneling assets to corporates while governments bore the debt. Looking at themes, this isn't an organized cabal but a systemic fraud maximizing profits without ethics in finite games. Short cycles like quarterly earnings driving exploitation. It creates hollow elites, as seen in Madoff's psychopathic traits. Charm masking greed, risk-taking, and lack of remorse. The fraud triangle: pressure from expectations, opportunity via lax oversight, rationalization as everyone does it. Explains scandals like Wirecard's collapse, where cooked books hid billions in missing funds. Demographically, low Western birth rates fuel immigration and AI agendas, manufacturing crises for control. Yet, sovereign nations resisting Western banks play infinite games, building wealth funds for long-term stability, echoing Bitcoin's decentralized model versus Fiat's derivatives trap. Pulling out some key ideas to drive this home. The global economy functions much like a Ponzi scheme, with debt expansion out of control. Another, taxes paid by today's workers are used to pay today's retirees. It depends solely on the expectation that future Congresses will honor promises, what supporters call a compact between the generations and opponents call a Ponzi scheme. And the underlying issues in the case involving Bernie Madoff falls unquestionably at the feet of the SEC. Finally, the wealth of the 1% is obtained essentially by lending money to the 99% and then charging interest on it, and recycling this interest at an exponentially growing rate. If this resonates, check out books like Killing the Host for more on financial parasites, or dive into historical texts on mercantilism. Opt out where you can buy local, avoid debt, hold sovereign assets like Bitcoin. We laid out the foundations, the debt-based Ponzi at the heart of fiat money, the K-shaped economy, and how governments become piggy banks for corporate interests. Now let's zoom into the modern power structure, how it operates today, and why the West feels increasingly subordinate to a handful of massive financial players. You know that feeling when everything seems broken? Nothing works, prices keep climbing, wages stagnate, yet some people keep getting richer? It's easy to chalk it up to incompetence, but the deeper truth is that dysfunction serves a purpose. The state takes the blame while the real allocation of wealth happens elsewhere, through lobbies and capital flows that most people never see. At the center of today's game sits what can only be described as the financial-industrial complex. A few giant asset managers control trillions, think tens of trillions across the biggest names, and they don't just manage money, they dictate terms. Through passive funds, ETFs, pensions, and insurance pools, they become the largest shareholders in thousands of public companies. That gives them proxy voting power and influence over boards. Tens of thousands of board seats. Companies that want access to capital have to play by their rules, whether that's meeting certain scoring systems for capital allocation or aligning with broader agendas. Politicians, meanwhile, need campaign funding to survive. That funding comes from the same circles. So when decisions get made, spending, regulations, bailouts, they tend to flow toward keeping stock markets buoyant, especially the US market, because if it crashes, everything else follows. The UK, Europe, Canada, Australia, they're all effectively junior partners now, printing and spending to prop up the system. It's not a conspiracy with secret handshakes. It's a fluid power dynamic where access to the cheapest capital wins, and betrayal at the top keeps everyone in line. Take wars, for example. Look at them through this lens and they start looking very different. Conflicts aren't just about territory or ideology, they're asset management plays. Install a compliant government, privatize resources, open the doors to multinationals, and suddenly a whole country becomes part of the portfolio. If a leader resists, tools come out. Currency pressure, intelligence operations, turning genuine unrest into engineered regime change. The military side benefits too. Stock prices rise with every escalation. It's win-win for the system. Success or failure, there are hedges and derivatives in place to profit either way. Historically, this pattern repeats. The British Empire used debt to fund colonial extraction, funneling resources back to private corporate interests while the crown carried the debt load. After World War II, the baton passed to the US, which amassed global gold reserves and set up the IMF and World Bank to enforce the same model worldwide. Loans come with conditions. Install a Western-style central bank, privatize key resources, take on more debt. Comply and you get rolled over. Resist and the pressure mounts until something breaks. The current iteration feels especially intense because we're at the end of a long debt cycle. Demographics are biting, low birth rates in the West mean shrinking consumer bases, so the system looks for new markets, new assets, new ways to keep the machine running. Immigration, technology agendas, even social policies start looking like portfolio management decisions rather than organic politics. Some key lines that capture this moment. Our governments and our central banks are piggy banks, and their job is to find a mechanism for printing more money and spending it in ways that pump the US stock market. Another, they can use intelligence and military in order to destabilize your country, turn genuine riots into color revolutions, take away somebody that represented the people, and install a dictator that takes the corrupt money in order to privatize all their resources. And this one hits hard. It's a ruthless game of betrayal at the top, power dynamics, and access to capital. If you're starting to feel the weight of this, that's the point. Awareness is the first step. What this means for regular people, why revolutions get crushed before they start, and the quiet, practical ways to opt out and actually live better, no matter how trapped the system makes you feel. The big realization hits when you see that this isn't about defeating some evil overlord with pitchforks. Any mass movement, whether it's a people's revolution or a push for real democracy, gets infiltrated fast. The military intelligence side turns peaceful protests violent, creating narratives to justify crackdowns. The financial side waits for distress, then scoops up cheap assets through mergers, volatility plays, or vulture deals. The tech side uses the chaos to push digital IDs, social credit systems, central bank digital currencies, and algorithms that keep people isolated and compliant. Media amplifies the fear. It's multi-pronged, win-win for the system no matter the outcome. That's why the real path isn't storming the castle. It's walking away. Mass non-participation is the one thing they can't fully stop. 40 million people deciding to buy local, grow a little food, support independent farmers and shops, avoid big corporate chains, and put savings into hard assets like Bitcoin in self-custody? That starts to hurt the machine where it matters, at the revenue line. Boycotts have already forced changes. Look at how quickly corporate profits can drop when enough people refuse to participate. For most people who can't just leave the country or go fully off-grid, the advice is incremental and realistic. First, own something, anything that isn't pure fiat debt. Even small amounts of Bitcoin, gold, silver, or other sovereign assets every month compound over time. Wages won't outrun inflation, but assets can. Second, minimize debt like it's poison. Pay down what you can, avoid new consumer loans, rethink big mortgages if possible. Third, redirect your money. Shake the hand of the local farmer, buy meat and vegetables direct, support independent businesses. Every dollar spent locally is a dollar that doesn't flow upward to the financial complex. It's not perfect. You still need the internet, roads, some tech. Perfection is the enemy here. The goal is progress. Be a little more conscious this month than last. Buy more Bitcoin this month than last. Boycott more this month than last. That small, consistent direction matters more than grand gestures. There's a spiritual side too. Money carries energy. When you allocate it toward things that build real community, health, and meaning, it tends to come back multiplied. When you feed the machine that exploits, it often blows up in your face. The elites chasing endless yachts aren't happy. History shows them hollow, addicted, depressed. Real happiness comes from simple things. Time with family, walks in nature, running for the joy of it, No commitments dragging you down. Money doesn't buy that. Even if every connection we've made is wrong, if the dots don't connect the way we think, the choices are still right. Buying local is still better. Avoiding debt traps is still smarter. Spending time on what matters instead of the rat race is still healthier. Whether the system's collapse is dramatic or slow and insidious, like the hollowing out described in that haunting 4chan post from years ago where life just gets smaller, grayer, more controlled every day, the path to a better life remains the same. The decline of one empire has always been the rise of others. The tactics used against the world for centuries are now coming home to the West. But that also means new powers are emerging, places that kept their resources, built sovereign wealth, avoided Western central bank control. They play infinite games while the debt empire plays finite ones. So here's the bottom line. Know the rules of the game. Protect your time. It's the one truly scarce resource. Use it to help others see this, to build better lives outside the machine. Stack assets quietly. Live smaller but richer in what matters. The system may own a lot, but it doesn't have to own you. If you want to go deeper, read up on monetary history, the mechanics of fractional reserve banking, or the history of empires and debt resets. Start stacking Bitcoin responsibly. Self-custody is key. Support local wherever you are. And remember, even if the dots are wrong, the life choices are right. It's heavy stuff, but awareness is power. Stay moral, stay sharp, stay free.